Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm at beautiful Cape Schanck in Victoria, and what I want to do in this video is show you how I shoot and edit landscape photos. So I'm going to look around here, find some compositions, and I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing. Alright, so we've actually come back to another location. It's the same place, but we've come back again. As you can see now, the sun is setting, so the colors and everything else in the sky are absolutely looking beautiful, which is what I was hoping for. The final shot I wanted was somewhere else, but they locked the gate at 6 o'clock and it's like 7:30 now, so I can't get the shot there. But this one looks like it's going to be really nice. I'm shooting the lighthouse, a bit of the mountainside and a bit of the water as well, and it's looking really nice. So what I'm doing so far, I'm just walking away. There's heaps of people there taking photos and things, so I couldn't film this part. What I'm thinking, I'm shooting an f11, so the depth of field should be pretty deep, but I'm going to be doing a focus stack because there are some plants and foliage right in front. And yeah, I'll see you back at the computer where I edit this photo. I'm pretty happy with it so far. All right, so here we are back at the computer. Now, there's a couple of things I want to explain about these images before we get to editing them. And the first thing is that I'm not overly happy with the composition, and that's just because I did find a composition earlier in the day that I really liked, but unfortunately they closed the gate at 6 or 6:30, whatever it was, and the sun wasn't setting till about 7:30. So unfortunately I was pretty much constrained to this one spot, and the lighthouse looks quite diminished in the image. As you can see on the screen right now, it's quite small. And if I zoomed in with my zoom lens, it would have made the lighthouse look a lot bigger, like made the background larger, meaning the lighthouse would have gotten larger in the image, but I probably would have lost that beautiful sunset and the sun rays on the left you can see there. So yeah, overall, not a photo I know I'm going to be overly happy with, but I just want to show you how I'd edit this anyway. I'd already filmed the first side of the video, and I want to show you the truth behind what happens a lot of the time when I get back home, and a lot of the images I just don't use. So yeah, as I said, I'm not going to be overly happy with this image, I'm guessing, by the end, just simply because of the composition. There's nothing really, there's no real leading lines or anything, whereas the first composition I had was really nice. I didn't even take a photo of it, I just looked at it through my viewfinder earlier in the day, and I thought I'll come back here later when the light's a bit nicer, but unfortunately they closed the gate. So that's that. Now originally, I'm just going to brighten these up for you, just press auto for a sec, just so you can see a little bit more in them. Now actually, I'm going to reset that. The reason the foreground and everything here is so dark is because when I shoot photos, I usually expose for the brightest thing in the image. And in this case, it's the sun or the sky. The reason I do that is because if let's say I set my exposure on my camera to expose the foreground nicely, that's what the sky would have looked like, completely blown out, probably no data left to retain. Whereas when you shoot for the brightest parts in the image or the highlights, if you expose for those correctly, you can normally drag up the shadows a lot easier, whereas highlights are very hard to recover once they're blown out. Shadows, you can recover quite a bit. Now, this is going to depend on your camera as well. I shoot with a Sony a7 IV, previously the a7 III is what I had, and the dynamic range and the ability to pull a lot of detail out of the RAW file is pretty good. But I know there's people that are watching this that are probably shooting on cheaper cameras or a bit older cameras possibly, and they might not be able to retain this type of detail. So in that case, what I would do is what I used to do with my older cameras, is shoot bracketed shots. And what that means is shooting a few exposures, perhaps one perfectly exposed, and maybe 2 stops overexposed, and maybe another 2 stops underexposed. And then when you get back to your computer, you can blend those in, so you can maybe paint in the darker sky where the sun isn't blown out, and you can paint in the brighter foreground that may have been dark when you took the photo. Well, in this instance, I'd be painting in a brighter foreground. This camera is pretty powerful with recovering, did I say camera or computer? This camera is pretty powerful at recovering shadows and things like that. So I'm happy to do that with this. But if the dynamic range was any worse, in terms of if the sun was any brighter, I probably would have had to do the exposure blending. Now originally when we got here, I did a focus stack, as I mentioned in the previous part of the video you just saw. So I'm just going to click auto so you can see what's going on here. In this image, the lighthouse and everything is in focus up to about this point where my cursor is moving. And in this other image here, right in the foreground here is in focus. So these trees and foliage right in the foreground is in focus, but the lighthouse and everything else is out of focus. Now originally I was going to focus stack these, but I've decided against that because I actually do like the fact that in this image the foreground is a bit blurry. I do like that depth of field there. And plus I'm probably going to end up, by the end of this, cropping a bit of that out anyway. I don't know how much, I'll experiment with it, maybe something like that. So I don't mind if it's a little bit out of focus there, to be honest. So in terms of camera settings, as I said, I couldn't really tell you my camera settings and sit there walking you through, which is what I was supposed to do. But a whole lot of people were coming to take selfies and all that type of thing. And they were just too loud for me to film. And that's totally fine. They can do whatever they like. I don't own the place. But I just thought I would explain my settings when it came to filming this part. So I shot at ISO 100. I kept that nice and low to obviously have a grain-free image. It was shot at 50mm, although it was shot on my Tamron 28-75 f2.8 lens, but I did shoot this at f11, reason being trying to get as many things in focus as possible. Now I could have shot at f16, f22, something like that to get even more in focus, but I find with this lens and a lot of lenses that they're sharpest between f8 and f11. So I rarely try to cross f11, and if there's something really close in the foreground and really far away, that's when I'll do a focus stack, which is what I did here, but I'm not going to be doing, I'm not going to stack the images and process the focus stack because I actually like how this came out. And it was shot at 1/50th of a second, so not a fast shutter speed, not a slow shutter speed, somewhere in between. But let's get to editing this. We've pressed auto on Lightroom, it's actually given us a pretty decent job, but I like to start from scratch. So let's reset this. The first thing I usually do is set the profile to Adobe Landscape. And as you can see, you just get a lot nicer colors. That's normal and that's landscape. It's obviously great for landscapes. It brings out the sky and a lot of the nice colors. So that's the first thing I normally do. With some images, it can overdo them and make things look a little bit too saturated, a little bit ugly. So in that case, I'll just use Adobe Color, the normal one. But for this one here, I think Adobe Landscape is pretty nice. So first thing I'm going to do with this one is lift the exposure slightly. And as you can see, the sun and sky is starting to blow out a bit, so I'm going to lower my highlights. Just to get, and I don't mind if the sun's a little bit blown out, it's realistic. The sun was extremely bright and you couldn't even look at it. So in my opinion, it's quite realistic to not have a sun that looks kind of like this. So I'll lift those up a little bit, let it blow out just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do also is lift the shadows to bring some detail in the foreground. Now I don't want too much, I think that's a little bit too much. We're going to be doing some brush work after this. So I reckon somewhere, keep it kind of dark. Somewhere around there is pretty nice in my opinion. Vibrance and saturation to me in this image is looking pretty good as it is, but I might add a little bit more vibrance to see what that's doing there. Yeah, I don't know if I like any of that at all. So I might leave that at 0 and we'll play around with the saturation. Yeah, in my opinion, it's already a very saturated image. If I was maybe using the color profile, then maybe I'd be adding more saturation and vibrance. But yeah, we're using the Adobe Landscape profile here. Plus, I'm going to add some pops of color later when we do the brush work. So that's really all I do when it comes to the basic adjustments. And remember that these are global, so whatever you do here affects the whole image, whereas the brush work and things we're about to do, actually I don't mind the exposure lowered a little bit. Maybe there, maybe a bit higher. Somewhere there. A lot of the brush work we're going to do is where I'm going to add some pops of colors and things like that. So what we're going to do now is start some brush work, and yeah, that's about all I'll usually do for the global adjustments. Just some exposure, highlights, shadows, and maybe vibrance and saturation if I find it needs it. I don't know why the saturation's found its way back up, so actually I don't mind that, maybe somewhere around 10. Alright, so now in a second I'll just have to take a look at this and we'll do some brush work. Alright, so what I'm going to do first is click the masking tool here, and it's going to ask us what kind of mask we want. I'm just going to choose a brush, and with the mask or the brush tool, you can start painting on and you'll see it's red where the area it's going to be affected, and then you can make those changes there. But what I actually prefer to do get rid of that brush, make a new one. What I prefer to do is actually move a slider. So let's say I know I want to lower the exposure. I'll lower that and then I'll start painting. So what I want to do is just take some exposure out of the top of the sky. A little bit there. Just because I feel it's a bit too bright, it's pulling the eye away from the main focus of the image, which is the sun and the lighthouse. And I'm also going to run that along the bottom here just to darken the foreground a little bit, because again, it's pulling the eye. And I might make another brush again and just go over this top part of this foliage here. I should have made my adjustment first, but it doesn't matter. This is all good. Just go over here and potentially maybe just lower the exposure or the highlights potentially. I'm just finding it's pulling the eye a little bit too much. So yeah, somewhere there I like. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. All right, so the next thing I want to do is add a bit of lighting and drama to the mountain here. Now, what I'll do is add another mask or brush one as well. And I want to lift the temperature, so warm it up a little bit, and potentially lift the exposure a little bit as well. This might be a bit overboard, but we'll be able to see what we're doing and then edit from there. I'm just going to add some kind of sun-kissed effect. So this is kind of what it looked like in real life. The camera obviously doesn't always capture things the way you see them. But as you can see, we'll turn that on and off. We've just added some beautiful warm light across the landscape there, which is what it looked like in real life. The sun was just looking beautiful. And perhaps we would have captured this if I had shot the foreground at a brighter exposure, but then again, we would have blown the sun out. So that's that. And another thing I'm going to do is create another brush. And what I like to do is lift the highlights and the whites. And it's going to help bring out some of the little twigs and things like that in the trees and foliage here. I don't want to go too crazy because, like I said, I'm trying to get people's eye away from this and more into the background, but we'll turn that on and off so that it looks like pretty nice, pretty nice. I might go a bit lower on the highlights and the whites, just somewhere around there. And next thing I want to do is probably just make one, actually, we might be able to use the mask we used before. I think I prefer to make a new mask for this one. Brush once again, and I'm going to go down to dehaze and actually lower that to haze a little bit. This just adds some, it just makes it more, oops, I'm just moving a mask. It just makes it more obvious that something's further away when it's hazy. So if you notice, even with your actual eyes in real life, not just a camera, when you look off into mountains and things like that, the further away they are, they're not very contrasty. They're very hazy and very almost pale in color compared to things closer to you. So I'm trying to accentuate that a little bit here. So I'll just play around with the dehaze slider. That's a bit much. Maybe somewhere there. Yeah, maybe somewhere there. And I'll just get out of the masking tool. I might step away for a minute, come back and see what this looks like. It's always good to look at things with fresh eyes. The amount of times I've come back to the computer and I've either hated something or loved it more than I thought I did when I've just stepped away for a few minutes. So I'm going to do that right now, come back, and I'll let you know what my next step is going to be. All right, overall, I'm relatively happy with this. As I said, it's probably not an image I'm going to be like blown away by, just simply the composition. There's a lot going on in the foreground I don't like and things like that, but we'll keep going. All right, so the next thing I want to do is brighten up the lighthouse. It's very dark. It's heavily backlit because obviously the sun's setting right over here and the lighthouse is in front of it. So it's heavily backlit. It's fallen on a bunch of shadow. So there's a couple of ways you can lift this. I'd probably prefer to use Photoshop for this. It's just going to give me a better, more accurate selection, but I am going to do this in Lightroom because most people are using Lightroom, and I mean, a lot of people have both, but Photoshop can be out of their depth a little bit. So I'm just going to do this in Lightroom. One way I'm going to try, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get the best result, this is the easier way, is adding a new mask. So back to our mask tool here. And I want to do a radial gradient and just drag something out from the middle of the lighthouse there, and then just lift the exposure. It's going to affect the sky and things around it as well. So that's why maybe if we just lift the shadows. Yeah, not big fan of that, so I'm going to delete that mask. There is a way of selecting objects with Lightroom too, if you have not the latest version, it's been out for a while, but one of the later versions. But It doesn't always do a good job. Let's see what we can get with this. You just kind of outline the shape of the object, and it's supposed to make a selection for you based on that. The reason I prefer Photoshop for this type of thing is because I can use a pen tool, and the pen tool's very, very precise and accurate depending how you use it. So it's done a decent selection actually. We'll zoom in there a little bit, just see what it's done. Okay, it's actually done a really good selection. Normally that doesn't do the greatest job, especially with things as there's a lot of fine detail in this lighthouse, like these little rails and things. I thought it might have over selected, but it's done a decent job. So what we can do is try and lift the exposure of the lighthouse and possibly the shadows. I don't want to go overboard because it's going to look fake, because obviously the sun is behind it. Maybe somewhere there. It still does look a little bit odd because you can see the real highlight on the edge from the sun. Kind of makes it look like it's photoshopped in, but maybe I'll also maybe just warm it up the tiniest bit. Add some magenta to the tint. Oops, what am I touching that for? This exposure. Maybe lift the whites as well. That's not bad. It's not bad. Probably could have been a cleaner selection, and what I'll do as well, you can see it's affected these plants down here. So I'm just going to subtract from the mask, which you can do here with a brush, and just a nice small brush. We'll go in and just tidy this up a little bit. Not perfect, but decent enough. The reason this lighthouse looks really odd is because it's brightened. We've lifted the exposure. It's also brightened in between these rails, which is actually the sky. So if without using the pen tool in Photoshop and going crazy with this, I'm never going to be able to get it perfect. So I'm happy with that. The lighthouse itself has a lot of weird things, like these little things hanging off it that make it look strange. But again, it's just part of, it's actually just part of the lighthouse. There's not much I can do about that, but let's just try and clean it up a little bit around here. Just cleaning up that mask a bit. I think that's perfectly fine for this image. And again, I'm just going to sit back and have a look, think about what else I could add or remove from this image. All right, I've come back, had a look, and I think another thing I could do is potentially play with so if we scroll down, the color grading here. So there's midtones, shadows, and highlights. And this just adds color to those areas. So if you want to add color to the midtones, shadows, and highlights, you can do so with these three wheels. So the midtones, what I normally do is just click somewhere out here and just drag around and see what it's doing. So that's the area it's affecting. I don't mind the yellow, but then I might, you know what, I'll leave that at 0. Actually not a fan of that at all. Shadows, let's see what that's affecting. It's always honestly just a matter of playing around with these and seeing what you like and what you don't like. It's not like I get an image and usually say I know exactly what I'm going to do with this. I just have to often play around with things just like this. So this is affecting the highlights, this one here. Which I'm just having a look around, seeing if any of these would help. And no, not really. So I'm going to reset all those. Oops, where am I? Just reset all that. All right. Now another thing I'll do is, I probably should have done this at the start, is remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. And that's it for that. It's detected my lens and everything, which is good. And often what I'll do as well, with landscapes, you want the horizon to be level. So you want, obviously this area where the water meets the sky should be dead level across your photo. It looks pretty good in this, but I'm gonna just press constrain crop and then press level. And yeah, it's hardly moved. So I dare say that is level. Let's just double check that with the crop tool. We can often just grab this and see where put that to 0. Yeah, it's pretty close. Maybe somewhere there is better. So I've just grabbed the crop tool, then moved the angle just so you can see in those grids that the water is level, sorry, with one of these lines. So that looks good to me right there. And come out of the crop tool. I'm probably going to crop this even further in anyway, so we'll do that after though. All right, so I've just lifted the global exposure a little bit, and that's about it. So what I'll do now, I'm going to try another little thing with another brush, just warming up the temperature and the exposure a little bit, and just try and paint in, just accentuate a little bit more of this sun and the water there. But I'll take that down a notch, it's a little over the top. Exposure wise, maybe I should just do that with the highlights perhaps. Maybe just less on here, yeah, it's better. So I just cooled it off a little bit, lift the exposure, cool it off a bit, and we'll see what that looks like on and off. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. Might have to be a different shape, maybe just start coming wider to skinny, wider. Yeah, I think that looks all right. So this is like 90% done in my opinion. As I said, I'm not overly a fan of this image in general, so I'm not going to be overly happy with it. But yeah, like mainly it's the lighthouse being, the fact we've lifted the exposure, something to me looks really strange about it. I think it's between these, just in here, which maybe we can fix that up a little bit actually. Let's grab a brush and perhaps lower the highlights and just paint in this area here and here. No, the highlights didn't do a whole lot. Let's try with the, that's very obvious. That's a bit better. Just zoom out again. Let's see what that looks like on and off. It's definitely better. It blends in a lot better. Those little railings are way too bright. It's brightening the sky behind them, which is the real issue with this, but that is much better. So yeah, what I might do right now, like I said, is crop it in a little bit. So shrink it down just a tad, get rid of a bit of that foreground. As I said, the issue with this composition is there was an initial composition that I had, but it just wouldn't have worked from this position because I really wanted to get the sun in with those beautiful rays, but I also wanted to get the lighthouse in, so I couldn't zoom in too far to get rid of some of this foreground. So that's just the unfortunate thing. Maybe somewhere there. Yeah, that's about it. This isn't something I would print or do anything with. As I said, I'm not overly happy with it, and it's mainly down to the composition. But yeah, I just want to show you how I'd take a photo kind of like this and edit this if I was to use it for something, but probably just end up on Instagram and that's about it. But in saying that, let's look at a before and after actually. That's a good point. So that's the before and after, obviously highly underexposed. We've just exposed for the sky. We've managed to pull that detail back and also lift all the shadows and exposure of the foreground. And we've got, yeah, somewhat decent image. As I said, I'm not overly happy with it. I never will be, simply just because of the composition. But I wanted to share this with you either way, because I know there's a lot of photographers out there who just hide their work they're not overly happy with, but I want to show you what happens good and bad and how I'd edit this if I had to. So yeah, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you in the next one. If you do want to learn a lot more about photography and editing, I do have a full course. It starts at the very basics, such as, what is ISO, what is shutter speed, how a camera works, and then it advances to much more advanced techniques towards the end of the course when we do things like light painting, stacking layers and things like that in Photoshop. So it's not just photography, it's also a whole lot of editing lessons in there as well. So if you want to check that out, there'll be a link in the description below. Other than that, hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.